June 4th, 1944, 11:09 a.m., North Atlantic, off the West African coast. On the bridge of the American escort ship, the sonar operator's voice is tight, too tight for routine. A crisp return, close range, a contact that doesn't drift like a whale or fade like an echo. This one holds, this one breathes back. Orders snap across the deck. The ship heels into a hard turn, engines changing tone, the hull vibrating as if it's eager. You can almost feel the tension in the men's shoulders, because in this war, a single contact can mean a dozen dead before lunch. Below the surface, inside a steel cylinder named U-505, the Atlantic is not water anymore. It's pressure, it's darkness, it's sound. A deep, uneven thudding rolls through the compartments, distant at first, then nearer, then everywhere at once. The boat's interior lights tremble, faces appear and vanish in the flicker. Men brace themselves with hands that have learned where every rail is, even blind. Then the first explosions punch the sea. Depth charges don't sound like thunder down here, they sound like the ocean cracking its own bones. The hull flexes, screws rattle, pipes sing. A man slams shoulder first into a bulkhead and coughs out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Someone shouts "Wasser" as a seam spits a thin needle of seawater. It's a small leak, almost harmless on paper, but in a submarine, even a small leak is a message. This boat is not invincible. In the control room, men move with drilled speed. Valves, pumps, pressure readings. Their hands do not shake because shaking wastes time. Their eyes do not linger because lingering invites fear. Up in the conning tower, Oberleutnant Sir Harold Long is trying to hear the boat's condition through the chaos, trying to separate a rumor from a failure. He feels something wrong in the way the boat responds. The turn is sluggish, the depth feels unstable, the power falters in stutters. More concussions slam the hull. Not deep detonations, shallow, close, the kind meant to damage, not erase. The Americans want the boat crippled enough to surface, but not so shattered it disappears into black water with everything inside it. A brutal jolt throws men sideways. A light goes out, then another. And suddenly, the pressure changes. The boat begins to rise. Not because the crew chooses to, because the ocean is pushing them up, like a wounded animal forced into daylight. The noise of gunfire arrives next, muffled through steel at first, then sharper, louder, as if the sea is being stitched with bullets. The boat climbs. Men clench their jaws. Every instinct screams, "Stay down," but the boat will not stay down. Then the surface hits them like a slap. The hatch opens. Daylight pours in. Wind slams into faces. Salt spray fills mouths. The world is too bright after the underwater dark, and the first thing Long sees is the American ships, close, aggressive, angled in like hunters. He sees the flashes of guns. He sees water erupting around the casing. He sees the white snap of rounds striking metal. And he understands instantly that on the surface, a submarine is not a weapon, it's a target. Long is wounded in the chaos, pain sharp enough to cut through adrenaline. The boat is not responding. He believes it's about to be finished. He makes the decision that ends the patrol. Abandoned ship. Men scramble up ladders, boots slipping on wet rungs, hands grabbing anything solid. They spill into open air in a rush that is half discipline, half desperation. The deck is slick, the wind is violent, the sea is black-blue and endless. In those seconds, everything they've rehearsed becomes fragile. Scuttling measures are started, valves opened, charges prepared, the ritual of ensuring the enemy gets nothing. But the ritual is incomplete. The boat has taken damage. The crew is rattled. The order to abandon collapses the careful sequence into frantic motion. A man reaches for something critical and doesn't. Another thinks someone else did it. The boat is left not fully destroyed, left in that dangerous in-between state where it might sink or might not. In the water, German sailors bob amid oil sheen and spray, clinging to life, watching their own submarine like a wounded beast refusing to die. Above them, the Americans hesitate for a heartbeat, because a surfaced U-boat can still kill, a final weapon might still fire, a scuttling charge might still blow. This is the kind of moment that makes men misjudge and die. Then the American decision comes hard and fast. A boarding party, 8 men, climbs onto the enemy submarine while it still threatens to sink under their boots. Their leader is Lieutenant Junior Grade Albert L. David. He moves like a man who has decided fear is a luxury he cannot afford. They run across the casing. They drop into the hatch. The interior stinks of diesel and sweat and metal. Water is already creeping where it shouldn't be. Somewhere deeper, alarms are crying out, thin and urgent. The American boarding party does not admire anything. They work. They slam valves shut. They find the bleeding points. They cut off the boat's slow drowning. They hunt for scuttling charges with hands that know one mistake can split them open. And while they fight the boat back from the edge, they grab what matters: documents, charts, procedures, the paper spine of a secret war. For the German sailors in the water, the sight is unreal. Americans rescuing a German submarine from sinking. Not out of mercy, out of advantage. It is a kind of intelligence that looks like madness until you realize what it is: control. The boat is taken under tow. The survivors are pulled aboard American decks. Blankets, hot drinks, quick checks for wounds. No theatrical cruelty, no shouting, just process. And that process is the first crack in the German U-boat men's worldview, because it suggests something terrifying. These Americans are not improvising. They have a system for everything, even for capturing a submarine. Hours later, as the tow line strains and the ocean churns behind them, the German survivors realize there is another layer to this: secrecy. They are separated, watched, moved under guard in a way that feels different from ordinary capture. Conversations are monitored, paperwork is tight, names become numbers. The tone is not just "you are prisoners," it's "you are classified." And after days of controlled movement, ship to shore, shore to rail, rail to somewhere they're not told, the German U-boot men are marched through a corridor that smells of oil and crates and machinery. A heavy door opens, and they step into a warehouse. Not a battlefield, not a ship, a warehouse. And one of them stops walking, because in that cavern of stacked supplies, he feels something colder than fear. He feels certainty. The first thing that hits them is the order. Not neatness for show, order that exists because it has to. Pallets stacked with identical precision, crates marked in clear stencils, fuel drums lined in rows like soldiers, shelves holding parts by category, by size, by use, clipboards moving from hand to hand as if the paper itself is part of the machine. Forklifts whine, lifting weight that would take 10 men on a dock. Workers move without hurry and without confusion. They don't argue about where things go. They already know. You can almost feel the difference in their breathing. Calm, steady, unpanicked, because the warehouse is not fighting for survival. It's sustaining a war as a routine. A Kriegsmarine petty officer, one of the practical ones, the type who understands submarines not as romance but as bolts and batteries, looks at the stacks and does silent arithmetic. Fuel, food, spare parts, rope, canvas, replacement fittings, radios, tools. And he understands what no depth charge ever taught him. The Atlantic isn't a duel of courage, it's a contest of throughput. Out at sea, BDU orders had demanded endurance, stay on station, hunt convoys, make the enemy pay. The logic was brutal but simple. If enough ships are sunk, Britain starves and the war turns. That logic dies in this warehouse, because this warehouse implies the enemy can lose ships and keep moving, lose supplies and keep moving, lose men and keep moving. The U-boat man watches a worker log a pallet's number, then wave it forward as if it's nothing. He thinks of the U-boat pens back in Europe, the shortages, the scramble for parts, the endless talk of not enough fuel, not enough trained crews, not enough air cover, not enough time. And here, in this building, he sees enough made physical. It doesn't feel like propaganda because no one is performing it for him. No one points, no one lectures. This is simply how the Americans are living. And that makes it worse, because it means the abundance is not temporary, it is structural. A U-boat veteran stares at a wall of stacked crates and feels something like nausea, not because he is weak, but because his entire war has been built on the belief that the enemy can be worn down. Now he is looking at an enemy that does not wear down. He looks around and realizes the warehouse is only one node, a single throat in a much larger body. Rail lines feed it, ports feed the rail lines, factories feed the ports, farms feed the factories, everything feeding everything. He remembers the Atlantic convoy battles, the cold nights, the periscope view of a merchant ship, the tense wait for an escort to drift away, the torpedo run, the explosion, the flames. He remembers feeling like each sinking mattered, like each ship was a step toward victory. And now he sees the unspoken answer. They will replace it. Not someday, soon, as a matter of schedule. This is the moment the U-boat men begin to understand that they were not just fighting destroyers and depth charges. They were fighting a world-scale supply engine. And engines do not feel fear. They just run. The Americans keep the survivors under guard and move them again, quietly, deliberately. Their status is treated as sensitive. The men are not allowed to send letters home. They are kept away from outside contact. Even the usual humanitarian oversight doesn't reach them, and that fact alone tells them what the Americans believe they captured along with the submarine, something too valuable to risk. The U-boat men are sent to a guarded compound far inland, barracks, wire, watchtowers, the architecture of captivity. But inside the wire, the real prison is uncertainty. If your family is told you died at sea, do you still exist? If your name is erased from lists, does your war still count? At night, the men lie on bunks listening to unfamiliar insects and distant trains. Some whisper about escape, not because escape is realistic, but because talking about escape is a way to avoid talking about the truth. The truth is this. If the Americans can keep them secret, it means the Americans are not just winning battles. They are managing the entire war like a controlled operation. And the next day, the U-boat men are marched past another supply yard, another line of trucks, another rail spur, another stack of crates moving like a living conveyor. One of them finally says it out loud in a voice that is almost empty. "We can sink ships forever," he whispers, "and it won't change this." No one argues, because they all saw the warehouse, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Then the camp loudspeaker calls in English. Guards begin moving. A new transport is arriving. Other prisoners, other captured men, other witnesses of the same American depth. And the U-boat survivors realize something else. Soon, they won't be alone with this knowledge. Soon, the truth will spread through German voices. And when it spreads, the war inside their heads will end, whether they want it to or not. The first thing that hits them is the order. Not neatness for show, order that exists because it has to. Pallets stacked with identical precision, crates marked in clear stencils, fuel drums lined in rows like soldiers, shelves holding parts by category, by size, by use. Clipboards moving from hand to hand as if the paper itself is part of the machine. Forklifts whine, lifting weight that would take 10 men on a dock. Workers move without hurry and without confusion. They don't argue about where things go. They already know. You can almost feel the difference in their breathing. Calm, steady, unpanicked, because the warehouse is not fighting for survival. It's sustaining a war as a routine. A Kriegsmarine petty officer, one of the practical ones, the type who understands submarines not as romance but as bolts and batteries, looks at the stacks and does silent arithmetic. Fuel, food, spare parts, rope, canvas, replacement fittings, radios, tools. And he understands what no depth charge ever taught him. The Atlantic isn't a duel of courage, it's a contest of throughput. Out at sea, BDU orders had demanded endurance, stay on station, hunt convoys, make the enemy pay. The logic was brutal but simple. If enough ships are sunk, Britain starves and the war turns. That logic dies in this warehouse, because this warehouse implies the enemy can lose ships and keep moving, lose supplies and keep moving, lose men and keep moving. The U-boat man watches a worker log a pallet's number, then wave it forward as if it's nothing. He thinks of the U-boat pens back in Europe, the shortages, the scramble for parts, the endless talk of not enough fuel, not enough trained crews, not enough air cover, not enough time. And here, in this building, he sees enough made physical. It doesn't feel like propaganda because no one is performing it for him. No one points, no one lectures. This is simply how the Americans are living. And that makes it worse, because it means the abundance is not temporary, it is structural. A U-boat veteran stares at a wall of stacked crates and feels something like nausea, not because he is weak, but because his entire war has been built on the belief that the enemy can be worn down. Now he is looking at an enemy that does not wear down. He looks around and realizes the warehouse is only one node, a single throat in a much larger body. Rail lines feed it, ports feed the rail lines, factories feed the ports, farms feed the factories, everything feeding everything. He remembers the Atlantic convoy battles, the cold nights, the periscope view of a merchant ship, the tense wait for an escort to drift away, the torpedo run, the explosion, the flames. He remembers feeling like each sinking mattered, like each ship was a step toward victory. And now he sees the unspoken answer. They will replace it. Not someday, soon, as a matter of schedule. This is the moment the U-boat man begin to understand that they were not just fighting destroyers and depth charges. They were fighting a world-scale supply engine. And engines do not feel fear. They just run. The Americans keep the survivors under guard and move them again, quietly, deliberately. Their status is treated as sensitive. The men are not allowed to send letters home. They are kept away from outside contact. Even the usual humanitarian oversight doesn't reach them, and that fact alone tells them what the Americans believe they captured along with the submarine. Something too valuable to risk. The U-boat men are sent to a guarded compound far inland. Barracks, wire, watchtowers. The architecture of captivity. But inside the wire, the real prison is uncertainty. If your family is told you died at sea, do you still exist? If your name is erased from lists, does your war still count? At night, the men lie on bunks listening to unfamiliar insects and distant trains. Some whisper about escape, not because escape is realistic, but because talking about escape is a way to avoid talking about the truth. The truth is this. If the Americans can keep them secret, it means the Americans are not just winning battles. They are managing the entire war like a controlled operation. And the next day, the U-boat men are marched past another supply yard, another line of trucks, another rail spur, another stack of crates moving like a living conveyor. One of them finally says it out loud in a voice that is almost empty. "We can sink ships forever," he whispers, "and it won't change this." No one argues, because they all saw the warehouse, and once you've seen it, you can't unsee it. Then the camp loudspeaker calls in English. Guards begin moving. A new transport is arriving. Other prisoners, other captured men, other witnesses of the same American depth. And the U-boat survivors realize something else. Soon, they won't be alone with this knowledge. Soon, the truth will spread through German voices. And when it spreads, the war inside their heads will end, whether they want it to or not. The new transport rolls in under a pale morning sky. Trucks first, then a column of men on foot, guarded but not brutalized. Boots on dirt, coughs in cold air, the sound of bedrolls shifting and canteens tapping against belt buckles. The U-boat men watch from behind their wire as the newcomers are processed. Not like a welcoming, not like a parade, like intake. Names recorded, numbers assigned, clothing checked, medical inspection. The shaved head here, a quick look at a wound there. The Americans do it with the same calm efficiency as the warehouse, the same calm efficiency as the tow operation, the same calm efficiency as the mess hall. You can almost feel it pressing down on the Germans like an invisible hand. This enemy does not improvise. This enemy processes. The newcomers are not submariners. Some wear the tired look of infantry. Some have the hollow stare of airmen who've been through flak and fire. A few still carry a thin crust of European mud in the seams of their boots. And with them comes something the U-boat men have not had in weeks: fresh war. That first evening, once the guards settle into their patterns and the barracks lights dim, the Germans begin to talk. Quietly at first, cautiously, because they've already learned that in captivity, speech can cost you. But the war they came from is still burning behind their eyes. A Luftwaffe sergeant speaks of a night raid, of engines roaring overhead and entire blocks turning to ash. An army corporal describes a retreat road clogged with wagons and broken vehicles, everything moving backward under Allied pressure. Another man, older, quieter, mentions in a flat voice that his unit had gone 2 days without fuel. The U-boat men listen, and something inside them tightens, because these are not propaganda statements. These are men talking the way men talk when the story is finished and only memory is left. Then one of the newcomers notices the U-boat men's guarded posture, the way they keep to themselves like a separate species. "Which boat?" he asks, in German. A submariner answers without thinking, then stops himself too late. The newcomer's eyes widen slightly. "You're alive," he whispers. The submariner doesn't reply, but the newcomer repeats it like a prayer or a curse. "You're alive." Because in the German mind, a submarine that disappears is usually a grave. No survivors, no letters, no end. Just absence. Now here are survivors, alive, hidden. It makes the newcomer look around the camp as if seeing it differently for the first time. "Why are you here?" he asks. The submariner hesitates. Then he says the truth without meaning to. "They don't want anyone to know." A pause. The newcomer's face changes. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. "Then you must have," he begins. He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't say the forbidden words, but everyone hears them anyway. Codes. Books. Something that makes the Americans careful. The U-boat man feels his stomach sink because the secret is no longer contained. A secret is like pressure. It holds until it finds a crack, and now there are cracks everywhere. Over the next days, the camp becomes a strange echo chamber. The U-boat men cannot write home. The newcomers can't either, at least not freely. The normal flow of prisoner life is blocked, and that tells the Germans again, this is not ordinary captivity. A rumor begins to form. Not specific, not detailed, but enough to distort the air. They captured a boat. They got the papers. They know our signals. They know where we are. Some men dismiss it. Some cling to it. Some are terrified. And then, as if the universe wants to make the lesson undeniable, another demonstration happens. Small, ordinary, devastating. A work detail is assigned. Prisoners are marched to a rail spur near the camp. They're ordered to unload crates and stack supplies in a long shed. Not the same warehouse as before, but the same language. Crates, labels, numbers, inventory. The Germans lift and carry. Their muscles burn. Their breath fogs the air. And as they work, they watch what the Americans do around them. A train comes in heavy with cargo. It stops exactly where it should. Men swing doors open. Forklifts appear. Cargo moves out. Cargo moves in. No shouting, no chaos. Just flow. A German infantryman pauses for a heartbeat with a crate in his hands, staring at the train cars lined up behind him. "How many trains like this?" he asks quietly. A U-boat man answers without looking at him. "Enough." The infantryman swallows. Because in Europe, trains like this have become targets, disruptions, lifelines that can be cut. Here, trains like this feel normal, as if even war cannot stop them. The infantryman looks away. "Then we are finished," he says. He doesn't mean his unit, he means something larger. He means Germany as a war machine. That night in the barracks, the hardliners reveal themselves. They always do. A man with sharp eyes and a voice trained for authority stands near the center aisle.
His collar is worn, but he carries himself like rank still matters. "Enough talk," he says. The room quiets. "You speak like defeated men. You speak like traitors." No one answers at first. The hardliner's gaze moves from face to face, searching for someone to crush. "Germany has survived worse. We will endure. We will fight. The enemy will tire." A U-boat veteran laughs once. Not loudly, just a small, broken sound. The hardliner snaps his head toward him. "What did you say?" he demands. The U-boat man raises his eyes slowly. "I said," he begins, then hesitates, because he knows what kind of confrontation this can become. But the words are already in him, and the warehouse has already carved the truth into his mind. He finishes anyway. "They won't tire." Silence. The hardliner steps forward as if pulled by a string. "You don't know that." The U-boat man shakes his head. "I've seen it." The hardliner's mouth tightens. "What have you seen?" The U-boat man doesn't answer immediately. He can almost smell the warehouse again. Oil, wood, metal, coffee somewhere distant, the scent of supply. He looks around the barracks at the faces watching. Then he says the sentence that changes the room. "I walked through their stores and I understood the Atlantic was lost." The hardliner's expression flashes, anger first, then something else. "For." Because that sentence is not just defeatism, it is contagion. It spreads. It gives other men permission to speak the thing they've been choking on. A Luftwaffe man mutters, "Their skies are endless." An infantryman says, "Their fuel is endless." Another one whispers, "Their trucks never stop." The hardliner's voice rises. "Stop," he snaps. But it doesn't stop. Because the Americans have given the prisoners the one thing propaganda cannot survive: time. Time to compare story to reality. Time to notice patterns. Time to watch trains arrive again and again. The hardliner realizes he is losing the barracks, not by force, but by erosion. And when a man loses power that way, he looks for a different weapon. He looks for fear again. He leans in close to the U-boat man, low enough that the guards won't hear. "This is dangerous," he whispers. The U-boat man meets his eyes. "Yes," he says, just as quietly, "because it's true." The hardliner's stare hardens. Then he says something that makes the room feel colder than the night air seeping through the walls. "You will learn to be silent." He turns and walks away. But as he goes, the U-boat man realizes something. Something new, something sharp. The Americans can feed prisoners. They can move supplies. They can crush an ocean war. But inside this camp, there is now a second war unfolding. A war over truth. And the hardliners are about to fight it with the only weapon they still have.
The next morning, the camp wakes to routine. Whistles, roll calls, boots on gravel. But the air inside the wire feels different. Heavy, charged, like something unseen has shifted in the night, and everyone's body noticed before the mind did. Men line up for breakfast. Steam rises from metal trays. Coffee smells like comfort and like insult at the same time. A guard watches the line with a face that says he's just doing his job. But in the German ranks, eyes keep flicking sideways. Who talked last night? Who listened? Who will repeat it today? Truth has become a dangerous object, not because the Americans forbid it, but because Germans do. The U-boat veteran sits with his tray and feels the hardliner's promise still hanging in the air. You will learn to be silent. He tries to tell himself it's bluff, that the Americans won't allow violence, that this camp is controlled. But he has lived long enough to know that control is not the same as safety. Not when men are desperate for authority, not when belief is crumbling, and belief is crumbling. It's visible now in small things. A prisoner who no longer says when we win, only if. A man who stops polishing his boots. A man who begins saving bread in his pocket like he doesn't trust tomorrow, even though tomorrow always comes here on schedule. By noon, a work detail is assigned again. Warehouse shed, rail spur, loading, and counting. The U-boat man is put on it. So is the hardliner. So are two newcomers from the last transport, men who still smell faintly of Europe in their clothes. The group marches out under guard, boots scuffing dust, the wire fence behind them fading as they approach the industrial edge of the camp. The shed is long and dim inside, with stacked crates and a chalkboard tally near the entrance. A foreman points with a pencil. Numbers are spoken, boxes are shifted. The Americans run it like a factory line, and that's when the hardliner moves. Not with a punch, not openly, with a whisper. He steps close to one of the newcomers, a young infantryman, and says something so low it's almost lost in the noise of crates sliding. "You know what he said last night," the hardliner murmurs, nodding toward the submariner. The infantryman peeps lifting crates, eyes forward. "I heard," he says. The hardliner's voice becomes softer, almost friendly. "And you know what that is." The infantryman hesitates. The hardliner smiles without humor. Defeat, poison, the kind of talk that gets men killed at the front because they stop believing. The infantryman swallows. He doesn't answer, but the hardliner keeps going. "They captured that boat," he says, "and now he's spreading panic. He thinks he's important." The infantryman looks at the submariner, just a man carrying weight, tired, not dramatic. The hardliner leans in. "There are men who would pay for that," he whispers. "Men who would call it betrayal." It's a trap. If the infantryman agrees, the hardliner has recruited him. If he disagrees, the hardliner now knows he's a problem too. The infantryman says nothing, and the hardliner's smile tightens into a thin line. A second later, the hardliner shifts his attention to another man, an older Luftwaffe sergeant, and repeats a different version of the same poison. By the end of the shift, the shed feels like a room where someone has released invisible gas. Men are working, but men are also measuring each other, and in that environment, any spark can ignite. The spark comes in the afternoon, in the simplest form, an accident. A crate slips. A corner catches a man's shin. He curses, stumbling back, face red with pain. The hardliner instantly points. "Careless," he says loudly. The U-boat man, already tense, snaps back without thinking. It was an accident. The hardliner's eyes flash. Accidents happen when discipline fails. The U-boat man steps forward, jaw clenched. He feels every eye turning towards them. He feels the guards watching, uncertain because they don't understand the language, but they understand the posture of conflict. "Discipline," the U-boat man says, voice low, "or fear." The hardliner stiffens. He hears that word and understands its danger. Fear is his instrument. Fear is his last remaining currency. The hardliner moves closer, and for a moment it looks like he might strike, but he doesn't. He only says, quiet enough that the guards can't hear, "Tonight." One word, a promise. The U-boat man feels cold inside his ribs. He keeps working, but his hands are slower now, not from fatigue, from calculation. If something happens tonight, where will it happen? In the barracks? In the wash area? In the dark between buildings? The American camp is bright and controlled, but darkness still exists. Corners still exist. Blind spots still exist. Back inside the wire, after work detail, men return to the barracks with heavy shoulders and heavier silence. The hardliner group gathers in a corner, murmuring, faces close together, eyes sharp. A Luftwaffe man passes by and mutters, "Be careful," without stopping. The U-boat man nods once, small. Night falls early now. Autumn is coming. The barracks light glows weakly. Shadows pool beneath bunks. The U-boat man tries to sleep, but sleep doesn't come. His mind replays the warehouse, the stacks, the Americans, the trains, the truth. Then it replays the hardliner's face. Tonight. At some point, footsteps move down the aisle. A man pauses near his bunk. The U-boat man keeps his eyes closed, breathing steady.
A whisper comes, almost too soft to hear. "Don't go outside," the voice says. The footsteps continue. The U-boat man's eyes open in the dark. He lies still, listening to the camp outside, distant guards, a door closing somewhere, the faint hum of power. Then another sound arrives, soft, careful, more than one set of footsteps, moving toward the barracks door. And the U-boat man understands the hardliners aren't coming to debate. They're coming to restore fear. And if they succeed, the truth dies in the barracks. If they fail, something else will break. He sits up slowly, silent, and reaches under his mattress where he keeps nothing that looks like a weapon, because weapons are impossible here, but where he keeps the only thing he has, awareness. He listens. The door handle turns, and the door begins to open.
The barracks door opens with a soft scrape that feels louder than it should. Cold air slips in first, then a shadow, then another. 3 men step inside like they belong there, like the room is theirs. They don't speak at first. They don't need to. Their posture does the speaking. Straight backs, slow movements, the deliberate confidence of men who believe the rules don't apply to them. The hardliner is among them. You can't see his expression clearly in the dim light, but you can feel it. The way he pauses just long enough to let everyone notice. The way he lets the silence stretch until the silence becomes a weapon. Most of the prisoners stay still. Some pretend to sleep. Some stare at the ceiling as if staring elsewhere can protect them. The U-boat man sits up slowly, heart pounding but face controlled. He has learned the most important survival skill in captivity. Do not show fear to men who feed on it. The hardliner walks down the aisle between bunks. His boots make soft thuds on the wooden floor. He stops near the center of the room and speaks in a low voice, carefully measured. "Too much talk," he says. No one answers. He continues, louder now, still not shouting, but projecting enough that the whole barracks hears. "Some men have forgotten what discipline is." A pause. "Some men have forgotten what loyalty costs." His eyes move toward the U-boat man's bunk. The U-boat man doesn't move. He forces his breath to remain even, as if he's bored. The hardliner steps closer. "You," he says. Not a name, just a finger pointed in the dark. The U-boat man rises slowly, feet finding the floor. Around them, men tense like a flock sensing a predator. The hardliner's 2 companions spread slightly, positioning themselves like guards at a doorway. Not to block Americans. Americans aren't the threat right now. To block Germans. To make sure no one interferes. The hardliner speaks again, voice like ice. "You told them the war is lost." The U-boat man answers calmly, choosing words like he's choosing tools. "I told them what I saw." The hardliner's jaw tightens. "What you saw," he repeats, mocking. "You saw supplies and decided you were an expert." The U-boat man's eyes flick briefly to the other bunks, to the faces watching. This isn't just about him. This is about whether anyone can say the truth out loud. He keeps his voice low. "I served under BDU orders," he says. "I sank ships. I watched convoys change. I watched escort patterns tighten. I watched air cover grow, and then I saw their stores." The hardliner steps closer. "And now you preach defeat," he says. The U-boat man shakes his head once. "No," he says. "I'm describing reality." That word again. Reality. It strikes the hardliner like an insult. He leans forward until his face is inches away. "You will stop," he whispers. The U-boat man doesn't retreat. "Or what?" he asks quietly. The hardliner smiles. It's a thin smile, not warm. "You'll learn," he says. Then, without warning, one of the companions shoves the U-boat man hard in the chest. He stumbles back against the bunk frame. Wood creaks. A man nearby flinches. The room freezes. In the silence, you can almost hear the calculation in everyone's mind. Will the Americans hear? Will anyone call out? Will anyone stop it? The hardliner lifts his hand, signaling his men to wait. He wants control, not chaos. He wants fear, not a brawl. He turns his head slightly, scanning the barracks. Anyone else want to speak? No one answers. A few men look down. A few look away. A few stare straight at him with quiet hatred. But hatred is not action. The hardliner nods once, satisfied. Then he looks back at the U-boat man. You think the Americans will save you, he says softly. You think their kitchens make you safe. Because that's exactly what he thought a little. Not consciously, but enough. The hardliner continues. They feed you so you forget who you are. They give you bread so you lose your spine. His companions shift closer again. The U-boat man sees it now. This is a lesson, for him and everyone watching. A lesson that says speak the truth and you will pay. And then something unexpected happens. From the far end of the barracks, an older prisoner stands up. Slowly. No dramatic posture, no hero stance, just an old man rising from a bunk with tired knees. He speaks in a calm voice that cuts through the room like a blade. Enough, he says. The hardliner turns toward him, surprised. Sit down, the hardliner snaps. The older man does not. He takes one step forward. You beat men in the dark, he says, voice steady. You whisper threats like a coward. The hardliner's face hardens. You don't know what courage is, he says. The older man's eyes don't blink. I know what courage is, he replies. I watched men die for lies. I watched cities burn for speeches, and now I watch you try to keep a dead story alive by frightening exhausted prisoners. The barracks is silent. The hardliner's companions tense, ready. The older man continues, still calm. We are behind wire. The war will end without our permission. Your threats don't change the front. They only change what kind of men we become while we wait. The hardliner's jaw clenches so hard you can see the muscle jump. He steps forward. You will shut your mouth, he hisses. The older man shakes his head. No, he says, you will. And in that moment, something breaks. Not in the hardliner, but in the room. Because the room realizes it has a choice. Fear or truth. Silence or voice. A younger prisoner sits up, then another, then another. Not rushing, not attacking, just rising like a tide. The hardliner sees this and freezes for half a second, because fear works only when men believe they are alone. Now the hardliner understands he is no longer facing one U-boat sailor. He is facing a room that has begun to remember it is a room. He tries to salvage control. He points at the U-boat man again. This one is poison. He spreads defeat. The older man answers immediately. No, he says. He spreads understanding. The hardliner's eyes flick toward the barracks door. A calculation. If he pushes too hard, someone will shout. If someone shouts, the Americans come. If the Americans come, the hardliner is separated, transferred, watched. His influence ends. He hesitates. That hesitation is everything, because it means the hardliner is afraid too. Afraid of losing power, afraid of being removed, afraid of a world where he cannot control other Germans with threats. The U-boat man watches the hardliner's face and sees something he has never seen before in these men. Uncertainty. The hardliner steps back slowly. His companions look at him, waiting for the order to strike, but the hardliner doesn't give it. Instead, he speaks in a low voice meant for the room to remember. This isn't over, he says. Then he turns and walks out, his two men following. The barracks door closes. The sound is soft, but the meaning is thunderous.
because everyone in that room just witnessed something rare. The hardliners were challenged, and they backed away. Not because they became good men, because the environment changed. Because fear is harder to sustain when the truth is visible every day, in kitchens, in trains, in warehouses, in calm American routine. The U-boat man sits down slowly, hands shaking now that the moment has passed. The older man returns to his bunk without celebration, no speeches, no victory, just survival. Outside, the guard patrol continues. Inside, men whisper again, but this time it isn't fear whispering. It's a new kind of sound. People beginning to speak like the war is real, not mythical. And somewhere beyond the wire, beyond the camp, beyond the Atlantic itself, the industrial tide keeps rolling west to east. Convoys keep sailing, ships keep launching, crates keep stacking. And the U-boat men understand that the hardliners were never the biggest threat. The biggest threat was always the truth. And now the truth has found its voice.
2 days after the barracks confrontation, the camp returns to its outward routine. Roll call, work detail, meals. But something underneath has changed. It's not peaceful, it's simply different. The hardliners still exist, but now they move like men who've been forced to remember the Americans are watching. Their threats don't disappear. They just become quieter, more careful, more poisonous. And because they can't openly terrorize anymore, they do something else. They try to rewrite the story. In the yard, during cigarette breaks, the hardliner leader speaks to small clusters, voice low, tone confident. "You think supplies mean victory," he says. "You think warehouses are war." He spits to the side, like the thought disgusts him. "America has goods," he continues, "because they haven't suffered. They are fat, soft. They won't endure real loss." A few men nod automatically, old reflex, old comfort. But now other men just stare at him, expression empty, because they have already seen the truth with their eyes. They've seen the trains arrive again and again. They've seen the trucks roll in at the same hour like a clock. They've eaten bread that tastes like a country not breaking. The hardliner is arguing against gravity, and gravity doesn't debate. That afternoon, a small thing happens that lands like a hammer. A guard, an ordinary American sergeant, stops near the prisoner line at the work shed and reads off a few words from a paper he's holding. He's not performing. He isn't even trying to be cruel. He's simply talking to another guard, loud enough that nearby Germans can hear pieces. "Another Liberty ship launched last week," he says, casual, like it's weather. "Those yards just don't stop." The Germans don't understand every term, but they understand launched. They understand the tone. They understand the part that matters. America is building ships like a routine, not like a miracle, not like a national emergency, like a schedule. A U-boat man feels his stomach tighten again, the same sensation he felt in the warehouse, because in BDU briefings, ships were numbers. Sink enough and Britain starves. Cut the Atlantic artery and the war turns. But what if the artery regenerates faster than you can cut it? What if every torpedo you fire is answered by a new hull sliding into water back home? That is not a contest of bravery. That is mathematics. That night, a U-boat men lie on their bunks, listening to the barracks breathe. In the dark, one of them whispers, "Do you remember the tonnage war?" Another answers quietly, "We were proud of it." A pause. Then, "We were proud of drowning them." No one responds, because pride feels different once you realize your victories didn't move the needle. A third man speaks, voice thin. "They didn't beat us with guns." He hesitates, searching for words. "They beat us with Replacement. Replacement. The word lands heavy because it sounds so small for something so devastating. Replacement means you can absorb loss. Replacement means you can make the sea swallow ships and not panic. Replacement means you can keep sending convoys because the convoy is not a gamble, it's policy. The next morning, the U-boat veteran is assigned again to the rail spur, but this time the work isn't just crates, it's vehicles. A line of trucks sits in the yard, fresh paint, clean tires, engines that start without coughing. A few armored vehicles too, tarped and stropped down, their shapes unmistakable even under canvas. The prisoners are ordered to unload them from flat cars. The U-boat man climbs onto a rail car and stands above a long column of hardware that looks like it has been duplicated again and again. He can almost hear a BDU briefing voice in his head. The Americans are not ready. Their industry is slow. Their people will not accept losses. He looks down at the vehicles and feels something in him go cold. If this is what they're sending outward, what are they keeping at home? He watches an American mechanic hop into a truck, turn the key, and the engine catches immediately. No struggle, no pleading, no scarcity. The mechanic drives it forward and parks it in line with the others, like he's arranging chairs. The U-boat man's mind drifts back to Europe. German fuel rationing, spare parts cannibalized from wrecks, engines coaxed into life with prayers and improvisation. And here, engines start like it's nothing. The contrast is not humiliating, it's fatal. Later, back in camp, a new rumor moves among the Germans. Not about the war, about them. Someone says they are being kept off the books. Someone says their families believe they drowned. Someone says the Americans captured something so valuable that the prisoners themselves are considered dangerous. The U-boat men hear it and feel the weight of it press down again. Being a prisoner is one thing. Being a secret is another. Because secrecy means significance. It means your existence can alter events far away. It means your last minutes did not end with surrender. They continued. Some of the men begin to wonder what's happening out there now because of what was taken from their boat. And in that wondering, another realization forms. If the Americans have their codes, if they know their signals, then the Atlantic was not just being fought with escorts and torpedoes, it was being fought with information. A war inside the war. The U-boat veteran sits in the yard one evening, watching the sunset smear the sky behind the wire. The air smells of cut grass and distant diesel. A guard tower silhouette stands against the light like a quiet threat. A younger prisoner sits beside him and asks softly, "Do you think they already knew where we were?" The U-boat man doesn't answer immediately, because answering means accepting a terrifying possibility, that the last patrols were doomed not by bad luck, but by a system that could see them coming. He thinks of how escorts always seemed to arrive faster in 1943, how air cover appeared where it shouldn't, how chance felt less like chance as the months went on. He finally says, "I don't know," but the truth is, he suspects. And suspicion is enough to change how a man remembers his whole war. The hardliners sense this shift and try to counter it with emotion. One night, after lights out, the hardliner leader whispers to a few men that America is only showing abundance to break them psychologically. He calls it a trick. He calls it manipulation. But his words have a problem now. They require belief. And belief is harder to maintain than fear, because belief must be fed constantly. Fear can survive on crumbs. The U-boat men lie awake in the darkness as rain begins to tap the barracks roof. One of them murmurs, barely audible, "If they can feed us like this." He stops.
No one pushes him to finish the sentence. Everyone already knows the ending of that sentence. If they can feed us like this, they can feed an army. If they can feed an army, they can feed the ocean. If they can feed the ocean, they can feed the war until it ends. And in the quiet, another sound creeps into the camp, faint but unmistakable. A distant train horn, then a rumble, another supply train arriving in the night, another line of crates coming in the night, another confirmation that the machine does not sleep. The U-boat veteran stares into the dark and feels the final shape of the realization settling inside him. The Atlantic was never lost in one battle. It was lost the moment America turned the war into a production problem. And now, inside this camp, the hardliners are about to realize something too. Their control is fading. So they will try something more dangerous than whispers, something that will force the Americans to decide what kind of camp this will be, orderly on the surface, or truly safe inside. And the men who understand the truth know what comes next. When fear stops working quietly, it tries to work loudly.
The something louder doesn't arrive as a riot. It arrives as an incident, small enough to deny, sharp enough to terrify. Just after evening roll call, when the yard is turning gray and the guards are changing shifts, a German prisoner is found behind the wash building with a swollen eye and a split lip. His jacket is torn at the shoulder as if someone yanked him hard to the ground. He says he slipped. No one believes him. Not the prisoners, not the guards. A medic cleans the blood in silence. A guard asks questions through an interpreter. The injured man keeps his eyes down and repeats the same line, accident. But inside the barracks that night, men whisper the real story in fragments. He spoke too much. He said the war was finished. He laughed at them. They took him where the lights don't reach. The hardliners sit on their bunks like statues, not gloating, not smiling, because they understand the power of plausible denial. Fear doesn't need proof. Fear needs possibility. And now the possibility has returned. The U-boat men feel it first. They've been living with this double reality since their capture, America's order outside, German intimidation inside. One of them stares at his blanket and realizes the true battlefield isn't the Atlantic anymore. It's the space between these bunks. The Americans can run a camp. They can feed thousands. They can schedule trains. But they cannot stand inside every shadow. And the hardliners know it. The next day, the American commander responds without drama because drama is not how systems work. The camp changes. Not loudly, operationally. More patrols, more lights, more controlled movement after dusk. The latrine route is watched, the wash building is watched, the corners are watched. A rule comes down, no gathering in groups after lights out, no roaming, no accidents. The hardliners feel the pressure immediately. They can still whisper, but they can't hunt as easily, and that, ironically, becomes the final lesson for the U-boat men. Because the Americans respond to intimidation the same way they respond to submarine attacks. They don't respond with rage, they respond with structure. A problem appears, a system adjusts. The hardliners realize they are being contained, and containment makes them reckless. That afternoon, in the workshed, the hardliner leader corners the U-boat man near the crate stacks. His face is calm, but his eyes are bright with the desperation of a man who feels his power slipping away. "You did this," he says quietly. The U-boat man doesn't pretend not to understand. "You did," the hardliner repeats. "Your talk brought the Americans down on us. Your talk made them watch. Your talk makes men weak." The U-boat man looks at him for a long moment. Then he says something that isn't a speech, just a sentence. "A lie can't survive a warehouse," he says. The hardliner's jaw tightens. He steps closer. "You think you're clever." The U-boat man doesn't back away. "I think," he says, "you're afraid." That is the match to gasoline. The hardliner's hand rises, fast, not to punch, to grab, to shove. He seizes the U-boat man's jacket and yanks him toward the shadow between crate stacks. But the camp is different now. A guard is closer than the hardliner expects. A flashlight beam cuts across the shed. A shout barks out in English. The hardliner freezes mid-motion. For half a second, the entire shed holds its breath. The guard moves in, hand on baton, eyes sharp. The interpreter arrives a moment later, breathless. The Americans don't know the words spoken, but they know what bodies and fear look like. They separate the men. They ask questions. The hardliner tries to play innocent. The U-boat man says nothing at first, because he understands the cost of speaking. He understands retaliation. He understands the old rules. But then he looks around at the prisoners watching. He sees the older man from the barracks, eyes steady. He sees younger prisoners who look exhausted, not from labor, but from living under fear. And he makes a decision that feels like stepping off a ledge. He speaks, not a rant, not an accusation, a clear statement delivered like a report. He threatened me, he says, last night, again today, and he is not the only one. The interpreter translates. The anger's expression doesn't change, but something hardens behind it. The American commander is called. The hardliner is removed from the work detail, then removed from the barracks section entirely. The two companions who entered the barracks with him are separated as well. It happens in a day. The Americans do it the way they do everything, quietly, efficiently, without performance. And when the hardliner's bunk stands empty that night, the barracks feels lighter, like someone opened a window. Not safe, but lighter. Men sleep a little deeper. The whispers change tone. The fear doesn't vanish, but it no longer has a single face controlling it. The U-boat veteran lies on his bunk staring at the ceiling and realizes something that hits him with surprising force. The Americans didn't defeat the hardliner with violence. They defeated him with administration. They adjusted the system. They removed the variable. And the U-boat veteran feels the Atlantic lesson echoing again inside this small wooden room. This is how they win, not by one dramatic strike, by making chaos smaller until it can't breathe. Later that week, as the prisoners march past the rail spur again, another train comes in. More crates, more trucks, more supplies moving as if the war is an economy, not an emergency. The U-boat veteran watches the motion and feels the final shape of his realization, settle not as despair, but as clarity. Out there in the Atlantic, he once believed a U-boat could change history with a single torpedo. Here in America, he has learned history can be changed by something far less romantic, a schedule, a warehouse, a system that does not panic. He thinks of the convoys he hunted, the ships burning at night, the screams swallowed by the wind, the pride BDU demanded from the men who returned. He thinks of how they told themselves they were starving the enemy, breaking the lifeline, forcing surrender. And then he sees the truth with a calm that feels almost numb. You cannot starve a country that can feed you while fighting you. You cannot outlast an enemy whose factories and rail lines treat war as a production problem. You cannot win an ocean by sinking ships when the enemy builds ships faster than you can sink them. The Atlantic was lost not when the last U-boat went down, but when America turned the sea into a conveyor belt. That night, the U-boat man sits near the barracks window. Outside, the floodlights hum, the wire fence glints faintly. A guard walks his route, boots steady, posture relaxed. In the distance, a train horn sounds again, long, low, unhurried. Another shipment arriving, another confirmation. The U-boat man closes his eyes and exhales. Not surrender, acceptance, because the realization is complete now. They weren't just facing destroyers and depth charges, they were facing an industrial tide. And once the tide is rising, there is no return.
If this story stayed with you, take a moment to let us know. A simple like helps this history reach people who may never have heard it. It tells the algorithm that these moments still matter. Subscribe if you want to stay with us. Here, we uncover the moments in the Second World War when everything changed, when there was no return. These are not just battles. They are human realizations, sacrifices, and truths buried beneath decades of noise. If you feel comfortable, leave a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. The United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, or somewhere else entirely. Tell us if someone in your family lived through this war. You're not just watching a video, you're helping keep these memories alive. Because once the stories disappear, there really is no return. Thank you for watching.